Someone was about to end everything 5 minutes ago. And sadly, this poor soul was ready to give up. My beloved child, with Archangel Michael says, something changed in the unseen world only moments ago, and this message is reaching you because a soul near you has been carrying a pain that nobody fully understood. The words you are about to hear are not a prediction of someone dying, but a fictional spiritual message about a person who reached an emotional breaking point and desperately needed hope before making an irreversible decision. Stay with this message until the end, because the final revelation is about the person who has been hiding their suffering behind silence, smiles, distance, and a strength that was never as unshakable as it appeared. There is a reason this message feels unusually heavy from the very first moment, because somewhere in this story a person has been standing at the edge of emotional exhaustion while everyone around them assumed they were simply busy, distant, stubborn, or uninterested. They stopped explaining themselves because every explanation seemed to create another misunderstanding, and eventually silence became easier than trying to make people understand what was happening inside their heart. Tonight, Heaven's message is not about fear, death, or tragedy, but about interruption, protection, compassion, and the unexpected moment when someone finally realizes that their life still has chapters waiting to be written. The person connected to this message has been fighting an invisible battle for longer than anyone knows, and their greatest secret is not something scandalous or shameful, but the depth of loneliness they have been carrying. They have watched other people continue their lives while secretly wondering why their own heart felt so tired, and they became extremely skilled at pretending everything was normal whenever someone came close. Their silence was not proof that they stopped caring, because sometimes silence is simply what happens when someone no longer knows how to explain the weight they are carrying. There was a moment when this person almost convinced themselves that nobody would notice their absence, and that thought frightened the spiritual realm because it revealed how completely disconnected they had become from the people who actually cared about them. Yet something interrupted that darkness, something small but meaningful, perhaps a message, a memory, a familiar name, a sudden knock, or a simple reminder that their existence mattered more than they believed. That interruption became the beginning of a different story, because the person who thought everything was finished was about to discover that their darkest moment was not the final page. Type Amen 111 if this message resonates with your heart. My beloved child, there is someone who has been hiding behind the phrase, "I am fine," while their heart has been saying something completely different, and this person may be closer to your life than you realize. They have become accustomed to carrying their pain privately because they believe explaining it would make them look weak, dramatic, or difficult, so they chose silence instead. But heaven sees the tears that never reached another person's eyes, the nights when sleep would not come, and the moments when they stared into darkness wondering how they could possibly continue. This person has experienced a series of disappointments that slowly weakened their confidence, and none of those disappointments alone seemed powerful enough to destroy their hope. One rejection followed another, one goodbye followed another, one broken promise followed another, until their heart began collecting disappointments like stones that became heavier with every passing day. Eventually they stopped expecting good things because disappointment felt safer when it was expected, and this became one of the most dangerous lies their exhausted mind had ever accepted. Someone may have blamed them for becoming distant without realizing that distance was their way of protecting themselves from another emotional wound. Someone else may have assumed they were cold when they were actually overwhelmed, and another person may have walked away because they believed this soul no longer cared. The truth is that this person cared deeply, perhaps too deeply, and every painful experience reached places inside them that they rarely allowed anyone else to see. The most important revelation in this message is that the person is not beyond help, not forgotten, and not spiritually abandoned, even though their emotions may have convinced them otherwise. A single moment of connection can become powerful when someone is drowning emotionally, because sometimes hope does not arrive as a dramatic miracle but as one person deciding to stay, listen, call, visit, or simply say, "You matter to me." That is why this message carries urgency without predicting tragedy, because the purpose is to remind you that compassion can arrive before the breaking point becomes permanent. Type Amen 333 if you believe hope can find someone even in their darkest hour. There is another layer to this story, and it involves a person who has been thinking about you more often than you realize. They remember something you said, something ordinary that you may have completely forgotten, because during a difficult moment that small memory became a reminder that someone once looked at them with kindness. Sometimes a person does not need a perfect speech to feel hope returning, because one sincere memory can remind them that their life has contained love, connection, laughter, and moments worth protecting. This person may have appeared strong in public while privately experiencing emotional exhaustion that made even simple responsibilities feel enormous. They continued answering messages, going to work, handling responsibilities, and appearing normal because they did not want anyone to discover how fragile they felt inside. Their ability to function became the very reason people failed to notice their suffering, because everyone assumed that someone who could smile, work, talk, and laugh could not possibly be struggling so deeply. But the spiritual message says that the mask is beginning to crack, and strangely, that can be a good thing. When someone finally stops pretending to be completely fine, they create an opening through which real support can enter, and this person is approaching that moment. Their vulnerability will not make them less worthy, because admitting pain is not failure, and asking for support is not weakness. Something unexpected is also developing around them, and it may involve a person they once believed had forgotten them. That person may reach out after a long period of silence, not because they know everything that has happened, but because something inside them suddenly tells them to check in. The timing will feel unusual, but the deeper meaning will be simple: connection is returning where isolation had been growing. Type Amen 777 if you are ready for healing, protection, and a new beginning. There is a message here for the person who has been quietly suffering, and it is this: you do not have to solve your entire life tonight. You do not have to understand every disappointment, repair every relationship, answer every question, or know exactly what tomorrow will look like before you deserve to remain here and receive another morning. Your only responsibility in the hardest moment is to stay connected to another human being and allow someone trustworthy to stand beside you. If this story reflects something real in your life, please do not keep it secret from everyone around you. Tell someone you trust what you are experiencing, move toward other people instead of isolating yourself, and seek immediate professional or emergency support if you feel you might hurt yourself. A spiritual message can offer comfort, but a real person beside you and qualified professional help can provide the practical protection that a difficult moment requires. The person in this story eventually discovers something that changes everything. The problem was never that they were incapable of being loved, but that pain had convinced them they were alone. Their mind had been collecting evidence for hopelessness while ignoring every small sign of connection, and they had forgotten that exhaustion can distort the way tomorrow looks. Once they allowed another person to hear the truth, the darkness did not instantly disappear, but it became something they no longer had to carry alone. That conversation becomes the turning point, because the person finally says what they had been unable to say for months. They admit that they have not been okay, they admit that they have felt overwhelmed, and they admit that they were frightened by how hopeless they had become. Instead of judgment, they receive presence, and that presence becomes the first crack through which hope begins entering their life again. Type Amen 888 if you believe no hurting heart should have to suffer alone. My beloved child, another secret is about to surface, and it concerns the person who has been watching you from a distance. They have wanted to communicate with you, but shame, fear, and uncertainty have repeatedly stopped them from taking the first step. They believed you would judge them for their struggles, so they created distance instead of asking for support. There was a particular memory between you that they kept returning to whenever their thoughts became overwhelming. It might have been a conversation, a smile, a kind gesture, or simply a moment when you treated them with respect while everyone else seemed distracted. You may never have realized how meaningful that moment was, but for this person it became evidence that kindness still existed. Their life has not been destroyed by one event, but by accumulation, and that distinction matters. Small disappointments became large emotional wounds because they were never given enough time or support to heal, and eventually the person began believing that nothing could change. The turning point comes when they finally understand that accumulated pain can be treated one piece at a time. A new chapter begins with something very ordinary, a phone call. There is no dramatic music, no supernatural spectacle, and no instant transformation, only one person refusing to let another person remain isolated in their worst moment. That simple connection becomes more powerful than anyone expected because it gives the suffering person enough space to breathe, speak, and reconsider the hopeless conclusion they had reached. Type Amen 1212 if you believe one moment of kindness can change an entire story. The spiritual message now turns toward you, because perhaps you have been wondering why you suddenly feel emotionally sensitive, why certain memories keep returning, or why you feel an unusual desire to check on someone. This does not mean you have supernatural responsibility for another person's choices, and you should never believe that you alone must save someone. Instead, take the feeling as a gentle reminder to practice ordinary compassion while allowing trained professionals and trusted people to handle situations involving immediate danger. There is a person who may need a simple sentence from you, and that sentence does not need to be complicated. I have been thinking about you and I am here if you need someone, can open a door that fear had kept closed for a very long time. You do not need to become their therapist, solve their problems, or carry their emotional burden, because healthy support includes boundaries and encourages professional help when the situation is serious. The person in this story begins to recognize that their darkest thoughts were symptoms of overwhelming pain rather than instructions they had to obey. That realization does not make the pain imaginary, because the pain was real, but it changes the meaning they attach to it. They begin seeing their thoughts as signals that they need immediate care and connection instead of treating those thoughts as a final verdict about their future. Slowly, the person starts rebuilding ordinary routines, and each routine becomes a quiet victory. They sleep more regularly, speak more honestly, accept help without apologizing for needing it, and begin noticing moments that would previously have passed unnoticed. The future does not become perfect, but it becomes possible again, and possibility is exactly what hopelessness had tried to erase. Type Amen 444 if you are welcoming peace into every place where fear once lived. There is a beautiful twist approaching, because the person who believed nobody would notice their pain eventually discovers that several people had noticed something was wrong. They simply did not know how serious it was, and that difference changes everything. Sometimes people care deeply but lack the courage or knowledge to approach difficult conversations, which is why honest communication can become so important. One person remembers the changes in their behavior, another remembers the missed calls, another remembers how their laughter had changed, and another remembers the day they suddenly stopped making plans. Individually, these details seemed insignificant, but together they revealed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The people around them finally understand that this was not ordinary sadness and that meaningful support was needed. The person is embarrassed when they discover how many people actually cared. They had interpreted silence as abandonment, when in reality some people had been waiting for permission to come closer. Their shame begins transforming into gratitude, because they realize that accepting support does not make them a burden. This is where the message becomes especially important: never assume that someone is fine simply because they look fine. A person can laugh while hurting, work while exhausted, post happy pictures while feeling empty, and tell everyone they are okay while desperately needing someone to listen. Kindness does not require you to know the whole story, because a simple check-in can communicate that someone is visible and valued. Type Amen 555 if this message reminds you to choose compassion over assumptions. The next part of the story concerns forgiveness, but not forgiveness of someone else. This person must learn to forgive themselves for not being stronger, faster, wiser, or more prepared than they were during their hardest seasons. They had spent years criticizing themselves for every mistake, and that constant inner punishment had become another source of exhaustion. They begin writing down the things they survived instead of only remembering the things that went wrong. They remember moments when they kept going despite having no confidence, moments when they helped others while secretly struggling themselves, and moments when they showed kindness even when nobody thanked them. For the first time, they begin seeing their history through the eyes of compassion rather than condemnation. A professional eventually becomes part of their support system, and that becomes another major turning point. The person learns that emotional suffering deserves serious care just as physical suffering does, and seeking help is not evidence of failure. With support, patience, and time, they begin developing healthier ways to handle overwhelming emotions. The spiritual side of their healing becomes quieter than they expected. Instead of waiting for dramatic signs, they begin finding meaning in ordinary moments such as morning sunlight, a warm conversation, a peaceful walk, or hearing someone laugh in another room. Their faith becomes less about demanding immediate answers and more about believing that another day is worth reaching. Type Amen 666 if you are choosing healing one day at a time. There is still one hidden truth, and it explains why this message may have reached you at this particular moment. The person you are thinking about may not be the person you originally assumed, because the story is ultimately about every soul who has ever felt invisible while surrounded by people. It is about the person who smiles at work, the parent who keeps providing, the friend who always listens, the student who stays quiet, and the individual who says everything is fine because they do not know how to ask for help. Someone may be carrying grief from a relationship that ended long ago, while another may be carrying financial pressure, family conflict, loneliness, humiliation, disappointment, or exhaustion. Their circumstances may look completely different, but the emotional experience can feel strangely similar. The message therefore does not point toward one doomed person, but toward the importance of noticing suffering before it becomes unbearable. The person who nearly gave up eventually understands that the story they had created in their mind was incomplete. They believed their current pain represented their entire future, but pain changes, circumstances change, relationships change, and people themselves change. What feels permanent during an overwhelming moment can become completely different after receiving support and time. The greatest miracle in this story is not supernatural destruction of every problem. It is the return of perspective, the return of connection, and the return of the simple belief that tomorrow deserves a chance. That belief begins quietly, but once it returns, it can grow stronger through every conversation, every appointment, every safe relationship, and every small act of self-care. Type Amen 909 if you believe your next chapter can be different from your last one. Someone who once believed they had nothing left to offer eventually becomes the person who recognizes pain in someone else's face. Their experience gives them compassion without giving them responsibility for saving everyone, and they learn to encourage others toward real support instead of pretending they can carry everything themselves. Their darkest season becomes part of their history rather than the definition of their identity. They also stop romanticizing their suffering. They stop believing that pain makes them spiritually special, and they stop thinking they must endure everything silently to prove their strength. Instead, they understand that strength can look like making a phone call, telling the truth, attending an appointment, sitting beside someone, asking for help, or simply choosing to stay through another difficult hour. There is a quiet celebration when the person realizes how much has changed. The same room that once felt unbearable now feels ordinary, the same phone that once carried frightening thoughts now carries messages from people who care, and the same future that once looked empty now contains possibilities they had forgotten. Nothing about their past is erased, but its meaning has changed. And that is the revelation this message has been building toward. The ending they imagined was not the ending waiting for them. Their story continued because someone interrupted the isolation, because someone listened, because they accepted help, and because one painful moment was allowed to pass without becoming a permanent decision. Type Amen 1010 if you are believing in second chances and new beginnings. My beloved child, if you are the person secretly struggling right now, let this be the moment you stop carrying everything alone. Put distance between yourself and anything you could use to hurt yourself, move toward another person, tell them plainly that you are not feeling safe, and contact emergency or crisis support in your area if you believe you may act on those thoughts. You do not need to wait until the situation becomes worse before you deserve immediate help. If someone else comes to your mind while reading this, reach out with care rather than fear. Do not accuse them, pressure them, or make them promise that they will never feel this way again, but stay connected and encourage them to seek qualified professional support. If they are in immediate danger, involve local emergency services or another trusted adult or responsible person who can help keep them safe. This fictional spiritual message is not a prediction that someone will die, and it should never be treated as proof that a specific person is about to harm themselves. Its purpose is to create awareness around hidden emotional pain and remind you that a person who appears strong can still need support. Sometimes the most powerful message is not that something terrible will happen, but that something terrible does not have to happen. The person in our story looks back months later and realizes how close they came to believing a temporary emotional storm was permanent. They are grateful for the person who noticed, the professional who helped, the friend who listened, and the part of themselves that remained long enough for the storm to pass. Their gratitude does not erase what happened, but it proves that survival can create a future that the suffering mind could not imagine. Type Amen 1111 if you believe there is still more life, love, and purpose ahead. Now the final secret arrives, and it is surprisingly simple. The person was never asking for perfection. They were asking to be seen without being judged, heard without being interrupted, and supported without being treated like a problem that needed to disappear. Once they received that kind of connection, they began discovering that healing could start without having every answer. The person who once hid every emotion begins speaking more honestly. They tell someone when they are having a difficult day, they stop pretending that exhaustion is normal, and they learn to recognize the warning signs that previously pushed them deeper into isolation. Their life becomes more honest, and because it becomes more honest, it also becomes more connected. There are still difficult days. There are moments when old emotions return, memories become heavy, and the temptation to withdraw appears again, but now the person has tools, relationships, professional support, and a plan for difficult moments. They no longer interpret a hard day as proof that healing failed, because they understand that recovery is not a straight line. The person also learns that asking for help early can prevent a crisis from becoming overwhelming. They begin reaching out before the pain becomes unbearable, and that one change transforms their relationship with their own emotions. Instead of waiting until they collapse, they communicate when they need support, and the people who love them learn how to respond. Type Amen 1212 if you are choosing connection instead of isolation. There is another beautiful transformation waiting for this person, and it comes through purpose. They discover that they have talents, kindness, creativity, wisdom, and experiences that can still contribute something meaningful to the world. They begin setting small goals again, not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because having something to move toward gives tomorrow a shape. They reconnect with people they had pushed away. Some relationships return, while others remain in the past, and they finally accept that healing does not require everyone to come back. What matters is building relationships that are safe, respectful, honest, and supportive rather than desperately trying to restore every connection that once existed. They also learn to separate rejection from identity. Someone leaving does not mean they are worthless. Someone disagreeing does not mean they are unlovable, and one painful chapter does not determine the entire story. This understanding becomes one of the strongest foundations of their new life. Eventually, the person becomes comfortable saying, "I need help," without feeling ashamed. Those 4 words once seemed impossible, but they become a sign of self-respect, because the person finally understands that protecting their life and well-being is not selfish. It is an act of courage. Type Amen 1313 if you believe asking for help is a form of strength. The story now returns to the mysterious moment from the beginning, when everything seemed dangerously close to ending. That moment did not become the final chapter because another possibility appeared before the person acted, and that possibility was connection. A message was answered, a door opened, a voice was heard, and the person was reminded that their presence mattered. You may never know how much your kindness means to someone. The person you greet casually may be struggling, the friend who cancels plans may be overwhelmed, and the relative who has become unusually quiet may be carrying something they have never explained. You cannot know everyone's private battle, but you can become the kind of person who makes honesty safer. Do not underestimate ordinary compassion. A sincere conversation, a supportive message, a meal shared together, an invitation to sit down, or an offer to accompany someone to professional help can become a meaningful bridge between despair and safety. You do not need supernatural powers to make a difference, because human presence itself can be powerful when it is combined with responsible action. And if you are struggling yourself, do not wait for someone to magically discover it. Tell them, clearly and directly, that you need support, because your life deserves protection even when your mind is telling you otherwise. Stay around people, seek professional help, and focus only on getting through the immediate moment instead of trying to solve your entire future tonight. Type Amen 1414 if you are choosing to stay connected to hope. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks, with contributions of up to $20. The final message is not about predicting who will suffer or who will disappear. It is about recognizing that behind many silent faces there may be stories we cannot see, and our response to those hidden stories can either create distance or create a doorway toward help. Choose compassion, choose patience, and choose to treat emotional pain as something deserving care rather than something deserving judgment. The person in this story eventually looks at their life differently. They no longer see themselves as the broken person who almost lost hope, but as the person who discovered that hope can return after disappearing for a long time. Their past becomes proof that difficult seasons can change, not a sentence that determines what comes next. And perhaps the most unexpected revelation is that their future contains moments they once could not imagine. They laugh again without forcing it, make plans again without fear, experience ordinary mornings with gratitude, and become genuinely curious about what life may bring. The darkness that once seemed endless becomes a chapter that ended, while the rest of their story continues. My beloved child, let this message leave you with one truth: nobody should be left alone inside a moment of unbearable pain. If this story reminds you of someone, reach out with compassion, and if it reminds you of yourself, please reach toward another person and professional support immediately rather than carrying the burden alone.